What's up, everyone? Welcome into episode 71 of the Two Straps Podcast, the podcast that covers everything happening in the world of college football. My name is Colton Denning, and I am your host, and I want to welcome you into today's show. It's been a little bit, but I am back for another episode of the Two Straps Podcast, which you can find on Spotify. You go to search Two Straps Podcast, find it there, follow along. Whoever is that third follower next to me and my girlfriend, thank you very much. Please holler at me on Twitter at Dubsco. I thank you greatly. Also, youtube.com/Colton Denning. You can find every episode of the show. You can also find all of my college football highlights, past and present there, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. So if you're a semi-frequent listener to the show or know me personally, you know that usually here I have a guest and we break down some team around college football, preview them, and see how their season is going to go. And the one problem with that, especially during baseball season, I work in baseball, so it's very time-consuming. It takes a lot to record interviews. It takes a lot to line up a guest, to try to figure out what times that works, and then try to plan that around everything happening in life and in work. And so that's why I haven't been doing the podcast as much this summer. So I got to thinking, that's such a time-consuming thing. Why don't I just do a podcast by myself? I've worked in audio now from college since 2010, and even going back since then, almost a decade. I have never done a solo podcast or a solo radio show, any sort of audio work. I have never done just straight up by myself without a co-host or without a guest. Growing up, I listened to a lot of radio, and I always thought the guys that had their own radio shows were kind of egotistical. They were kind of jerks. They were yellers, and I don't feel like I'm like that. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm definitely not a yeller, but it was always just, it seemed a little corny to me. And frankly, I was probably a little scared of doing it myself and thought I would sound stupid. But since I haven't done a podcast for so long, and I just hate having to reach out to people and try to figure out what to do, I figured, what the hell? I'm going to record my first solo podcast ever. So please bear with me here and stick along for the show. I hope you enjoy it. But this is something that maybe just for myself, I feel like I had to do. And today I want to talk about 4 or 5 things that I'm super excited for in college football this season. And these aren't things that you'll find on the ESPN.com college football front page or CBS Sports. I'm not going to talk about Tua Tagovailoa and whether he can win the Heisman, how he's going to look heading into probably his last season at Alabama, or whether Trevor Lawrence should sit out and wait till he can declare for the NFL draft, whether Clemson and Bama are going to play in the national championship game, even Ohio State or Oklahoma. You're not going to hear that on this podcast. Many other people talk about it. Leave it to the smarter people. I want to talk about some stuff that maybe is a little bit more under the radar, maybe a little bit more stupid, and stuff that I am interested in. So I hope that you can listen to it and take something from it, and I hope that you enjoy it. So with that being said, I want to get right into it, and since I don't have anything to throw to, like I can't be like, hey, let's go to our guest, I'm just going to throw it to myself. And one of my favorite things in all of football, this happens in the NFL, happens in college, really happens in all of sports, and kind of in life, is that when you fire somebody, you're going to hire the exact opposite of that person. This happens in breakups too, all the time. If you look around at yourself or your friends, look at who they're breaking up with and see who they get with the next time. It's probably the exact opposite. But in terms of like college and NFL, when teams fire a head coach, they almost always come back with somebody who is a 180 of that person. Your defense first head coach couldn't figure out a way how to score any sort of points, and you went 3-9 despite having a top 5 defense. Get ready. The whiz offensive coordinator is about to come in. I'm looking at you, Will Muschamp era at Florida. Conversely, your defense played like Texas Tech the last few seasons. Well, good luck for you. That defensive coordinator that has schemed everybody into oblivion the past couple of seasons, He's about to be your head coach, and he's going to fix your defense while leaving the offense completely the same and definitely not trying to turn them into a ball control, run-first group. So that's what we usually see, and most of the time, I think it's a lot of lip service. It doesn't usually end up paying off. Programs that have certain problems end up having those problems regardless of what style of coach they have. One program did this, though, this offseason, and I'm very intrigued by it, and I think ultimately in the long run, it's going to pay dividends, and that is Louisville. Now, we don't need to get into how much of a train wreck they were under Bobby Petrino last year, but if you know anything about Bobby Petrino or the way he runs programs, a lot of it seems to be with a very negative sort of attitude. Petrino has that reputation that he leads by fear, he leads by negativity and getting guys in line. And he also kind of has this reputation of being unable to sustain building a program. And that's due to him not staying at a job for more than 4 seasons, and also the way that programs have played after he's left. Louisville, the first time, they kind of just played 500 ball under Steve Kragthorpe. When he was at Arkansas, there was the motorcycle fiasco, but I'm not convinced that things weren't going to go down anyway. Their high point was going 11-2, winning the Cotton Bowl. Things probably go the same way, although not in the hilarious manner that they did with the motorcycle fiasco. And then this past time at Louisville, if you watched them play last year, they were maybe the most uninspired and uninspiring team in the country, at the very least, I think in Power 5 football. It was just sad to watch those guys go out and get destroyed each week. And I think that goes back to the way that he builds stuff. There was his 5th season there, and I think at that point, he was ready for the next challenge. He was ready to go find something else. It's like you or me when we play the old NCAA series. I want to build the program up for 5 or 6 years, but after I win a couple national championships at Florida Atlantic, I am bouncing to Southern Miss to go build them up. I think Bobby Petrino has a little bit of that in him. So you have these 2 traits. One, he's a very negative guy and coaches very negatively, and I think instills this closed offishness, if that's even a word, amongst his players. And then he doesn't really sustain building a program, or either doesn't want to or just can't. Enter Scott Satterfield from Appalachian State, a guy who has this reputation for being one of the most positive and well-respected head coaches out there. If you read the athletics piece on Louisville this year in their season preview, it talks all about how Satterfield opened up the offices to their players this season and how some of those guys said that they hadn't even been on the 2nd floor of the football offices there because it was closed to them. It wasn't even an option to go visit the head coach, and guys were just like shocked that they could actually go and talk to the head coach in his office. And that was one of the first things he did in the discussions at practice, where the first 4 or 5 times they got out of the field, guys were just kind of on eggshells because they thought if they made one single mistake, somebody was going to be right up their ass, ready to chew them out. And they learned that, hey, that's not how we're doing things anymore. It's going to be very positive. It's going to be very family friendly, and we're going to build you up. So you have that side. He's a super positive guy. Coach is completely different and instills confidence and discipline in guys very differently than Petrino. Secondly, he's like the ideal program builder. He's only had one job at Appalachian State. He was there for 5 years, went 7-5, then 11-2, 10-3, 9-4, and 10-2. But I think he guided them in that transition into Sun Belt and FBS and that Division I. I guess that's the old name for it. But he guided them into this higher level of football. And he's been a guy who's just been able to replace talent and turn Appalachian State very quickly into one of the best Group of 5 teams in the country. And that's not a small accomplishment by any means, especially when you're jumping from one level of football to the next. They made that transition about as smoothly as anyone has, and they were able to have success. And I think a lot of that is due to the way that he builds his program and the way that he coaches. So now that he's in this situation in Louisville where it's basically stripped down to the studs, there's obviously talent there. You're not Louisville and you don't have any sort of players you can work with, but you're going with this whole new philosophy. It's going to be ugly in year one. I don't think that there's any way to look at Louisville this year and think that they're going better than 4-8. I think that would be a miracle season for them. So what's happening at Louisville this year isn't groundbreaking or revolutionary. Back to my point of hiring coaches that are completely different from the previous one. It's not anything new, but it's the one that I'm most fascinated with because it's one that I think I'm very convinced that it's going to work. This is a guy that probably knows that it's not going to be very fun in year one. There's going to be a lot of hard work that's associated with it. They're going to be a rough watch. They're going to have to figure things out on the fly and try to put players in positions that maybe they don't necessarily fit. But I'll say one thing without seeing them in fall practice or in obviously any meaningful sort of games yet, because we can't see that for another month. I will bet that no team in the country will play as hard as Louisville this year. At the very least on the level of the Power 5. They're going to be one of the hardest playing teams in the country, and they're going to be one of those groups that teams like Notre Dame and Clemson are going to play them and probably win by 20, 25 points. But in the film room after the game, guys like Brian Kelly and Dabo Swinney and their coaching staffs are going to look at each other and be like, these guys are going to be a problem in a couple of seasons because they're already playing hard. When they get the talent, they're going to be very good and very well coached. So Louisville, not going to be great this season by any means. Probably going to be a tough watch, but I am very fascinated to see what Scott Satterfield does long-term there, and I am super high on them, and I am betting that he's going to have a lot of success at Louisville in the coming years. So that's the first thing I'm looking out for that's a little bit under the radar this year. And the second thing is also sticking in the ACC. When you look at that conference, I don't think it's a super strong opinion to say that Clemson is the only team that has a shot of making the playoff there. Regardless of how fun you think Syracuse is and how good of a job Dino Babers is doing there right now, Clemson is really the only star-packed, great team in that conference. But maybe more so than any other league, I think that the ACC, from top to bottom, literally every team has something exciting about them and something that I'm looking forward to. And I'll break it down in a sentence or two for each non-Clemson team. Florida State. Will anyone block on their offensive line? And also, are they going to get punched in the mouth by Boise State week 1? Because I'm pretty sure that Boise State's going to win that game. 2, North Carolina. What more do I need to say than just, I'm back, baby? I'm stoked to see Mack Brown back on the sidelines, if only just so I have an excuse to break out the voice all season long. That could be something that ends up being kind of good for UNC, but it could also be a super train wreck. And really, there's nothing better in college football than an absolute train wreck. So I'm looking forward to it. I just want to do the voice. I'm stoked that Mack is back on the sidelines. Boston College. How many people is A.J. Dillon going to stiff arm into dust this season? He's one of the best running backs in the country, so physical. He's like your throwback 1989 running back, like a guy like Rodney Hampton. If anyone else old remembers Rodney Hampton, that's like A.J. Dillon, a dude that's just going to stiff arm you into dust. I'm very excited to watch him again this year. Duke. How funny would it be if they lost the quarterback in the top 10 of the NFL draft and they were even better? Because knowing David Cutcliffe, it's a strong possibility. Georgia Tech. A lot like Louisville, maybe a mirror image in the sense of what those programs are right now. Probably going to be pretty bad, going to be a tough watch, but the head coach has a strong vision. I really like what Jeff Collins is bringing to them. He's focusing on Atlanta. We talked about that a couple months ago on this podcast with the people from the Rumble Seat. Check out that episode. Fun look into what Jeff Collins' plan is at Georgia Tech. I think long-term, that's another guy you want to bet on having success there. Miami. Will my man Tate Martell, a.k.a. Vanilla Vice, end up on the field? Hopefully so, because I want to use that nickname all season. NC State. How are they going to replace all the production they lost offensively? Dave Doeren has done a pretty good job there. They haven't necessarily broken through to the level they probably want to, and they may have missed their window. But hard to bet against Dave Doeren with what he's done there. Well, that's a lot of production to lose. Pitt, those uniforms are pretty sweet. Maybe they'll figure out how to pass this season, but even if not, they'll look good doing it. I love those uniforms. That's all that matters. Syracuse, can they take the leap? Can they do it? Can they play to the hype and expectations? Because there's a lot of it. Hipster college football Twitter is going to pump these guys up, especially if they go on a run to start the season. I like them a lot, but that's the sort of team that I think the hype can get to. So let's see what Dino Babers can kind of drum up to keep his guys focused. I think this is his last season there. Someone's going to scoop him up. But can Syracuse, 1, take the leap, and 2, can they manage the expectations? Virginia, I love what Bronco Mendenhall is doing. He's doing a phenomenal job at that program, and I think this is the year that they beat Virginia Tech. They finally get that monkey off their back. I want to see it. I think that they're fired up. They should have done it the past couple of seasons. This is the year it happens. They break the streak. Virginia going to have quietly another very good season. Virginia Tech. Are we sure Justin Fuente is the guy? Because I want him to be the guy, but are we sure? Because the evidence would suggest that maybe he's not. I don't know. We'll see. This is a big year for him, but I am becoming less and less convinced that he's the guy there. And then finally, Wake Forest. Who has anything bad to say about Wake Forest? Does Wake Forest even have a rival? Because they shouldn't. Everybody should be rooting for Wake Forest, especially a guy like Dave Clawson. He's done an excellent job. I hope that they go bowling again. They are one of the easiest programs to root for. I wish my guy Greg Dortch was still there, but Wake Forest always has guys that I want to root for, and I hope, like I said, that they go bowling again. So that's what I think about the non-Clemson ACC. There's not a ton of high-level star power. There's not a lot of playoff contenders. In fact, there's only one, but it's solid. It has the most depth, I think, and I think that it also has the most teams that are very interesting that you can look at and say, I want to follow that team for a specific storyline. I think that each of these teams has something that you can follow for. And that's really, if you're not a fan of one of them, that's all you can ask for. None of these teams are boring. Even Boston College, they have stuff to be excited about. I said I didn't want to talk about top-level quarterbacks or the most obvious sort of things, and I'm sticking to that. But I do want to bring up what I think is a pretty high-level quarterback, and somebody most people know, especially college football fans, is Texas A&M's Kellen Mond. He's a guy that's going into basically his third year as a starter. He missed, I think, the last 3 games of his freshman year, but other than that, he's played almost every game, I think, the past couple of years, and he's been pretty good. He's also had some big moments. If you watch the Clemson game early last season, I think he threw 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, stepped up in big moments, made some wild throws, and was able to lead that team on a couple of scoring drives that made you think like they were going to win that game. He's also looked decent at times against Alabama. I think it was 2 years ago when he was a freshman that he played pretty well. He also had 6 touchdowns and no interceptions in that wild overtime game against LSU last year. So he's definitely shown flashes, I think, of being one of the top quarterbacks in the country, but he's also had inconsistent moments. He tied for 7th in yards per attempt in SEC play last year, but I think that there's a lot to like about his game and the way that he leads, and Jimbo Fisher having a guy like him in his first couple of seasons there as he builds that program up in his image. It might not be the year that Mond takes the full leap because the schedule is just so hard. They play at Clemson, at LSU, and at Georgia, and then play home against Alabama. So it may not be the season for a team breakthrough or one that we're talking about Kellen Mond being a Heisman contender or anything. But I think that in a couple of those games, he'll shine, and maybe they steal that game at Clemson. Maybe they beat LSU on the road. Maybe they beat Georgia. I think they'll get one of those games. He'll have a really good game and take another step forward. So if you're thinking of who are those next group of quarterbacks beyond just who people are talking about in Tagovailoa or Trevor Lawrence or Justin Herbert, maybe Kellen Mond steps up in that second or third group and kind of stands out a little bit this season with the way he plays in those big games. So that's 3 things so far. Louisville, how they do under Scott Satterfield, the ACC, its depth, and then Kellen Mond. I'm looking for all those things. And then finally, what I want to talk about on this podcast is the group of 5. Who's going to step up in G5 this year? Who's going to be that team that we are all talking about come bowl season? Is it going to be UCF again? They have a lot of pieces back. Josh Heupel seems to have them on the same track that Scott Frost did. No Mackenzie Milton this year because of the injury. But other than that, they just seem like they have a very strong culture in place. They know what they want to do, and they will certainly be in the mix this season. Cincinnati, very strong, very sound under Luke Fickell. They play an early game against Ohio State that I think will be one that people want to watch, not only to see Luke Fickell back in Columbus and see that matchup, but a lot of new pieces for Ohio State this year as well, and how Justin Fields does against what's going to be a very, I think, complex Cincinnati defense, and is going to give him his first real challenge. Boise State. Boise State is Boise State, and I'm convinced, like I said, that they're going to beat Florida State in week 1. They're the old news at this point. UCF is kind of taking their spot as the cream of the crop G5 team and the one everybody wants to talk about. But Boise State's still trucking along. Maybe this is the year that they reclaim that throne. I think they're going to get FSU and kind of put everybody on notice that, like, oh, Boise State hasn't gone anywhere. They are still doing what they've done for the last decade plus. Another G5 school that could sneak up on a big name early in the season is Army when they play Michigan at the Big House. Army is sneaky good. You never want to play them. If your team schedules Army, write a letter to your athletic director. Tell him, hey, I support the troops, but please stop doing this. Playing triple option teams, it sucks. It is the absolute worst. I hate it. It's never any fun. And Michigan, with a new defensive staff and these expectations that they're going to make the playoff, I don't know. I think that could be a lot of fun, at least for me. From an Ohio State fan perspective, let's make it happen, Army. I want to see it. Memphis is also one of these G5 teams with a very strong identity. They've had a lot of offensive talent recently, talent that has gone in the first 3 rounds of the NFL draft. They've built up that identity of what they want in a very stable program. Maybe this is the year that they break through and reach the top of the G5. And then finally, at least for me, Fresno State. They were excellent last year under Jeff Tedford. They lose a ton of production. I think they're one of the least experienced teams in the country. But Jeff Tedford in that sort of environment where he can just do his thing, I think is a perfect match. And I want to see how they kind of rebound. I doubt that they'll be one of the best group of 5 teams or the best, but I think that Tedford has them in a great spot going forward. So that's it. Those are some things that I'm really excited for this season that are a little bit under the radar. I hope this isn't what everybody's talking about. I don't think we got hot G5 talk on all the college football podcasts, but you never know. There's a lot of good ones out there. But between that, Kellen Mond, the stuff in the ACC, and Louisville, that's some stuff that I have my eye on this season that's maybe a little bit under the radar that I want to see. So I hope that you keep an eye on it too, and we can chat about it as this season rolls along and we really get into it and see how some of this stuff shakes out. I also hope that you guys enjoyed my first solo podcast. This was something that was very daunting to me. I put it off for a long time. I didn't think I'd be able to do it and it would sound good. And maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's absolutely terrible. I'm terrified to go back and edit this and see how it sounds. But this was something that I felt I needed to do, and I hope that there was some good nuggets of college football stuff and it was entertaining enough to help you get through this last portion of the offseason as we get closer to the 2019 season. And if you think I should do more of these, please connect with me on Twitter. I am there at Dubsco. That's DUBSCO. If you want to follow any of my Ohio State work, you can catch me on the Hangout in the Holy Land podcast. We're on Twitter at Holy Land Pod. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Just search Land Grant Holy Land. Find all my stuff there. Make sure to go to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Colton Denning. A lot of really great highlights where you won't have to hear my voice. You can just watch 20 minutes of Reggie Wayne or 20 minutes of Santana Moss, 30 minutes of Peter Warrick. A lot of cool stuff from the past, and there's going to be stuff up as this season starts from guys that are killing it right now. So those are all the ways you can keep in touch with me and the show. If you do like it, follow along on Spotify, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, and shoot me a line. Let me know how I'm doing and how you liked this solo pod, because I think I'm going to do some more. We'll see. Hope you enjoyed the show. One last time, want to thank you for listening. My name is Colton Denning, and this is the Two Stripes Podcast.